Hello and welcome to another edition of Straight from the Training Ground, the podcast where we share our love for the beautiful game and the people out in their communities doing beautiful things. And our guest this week is an industry leader in high performance. He has written 6 books. He's worked with the NBA, NFL, NWSL, SEC, just to name a few, many high-profile coaches and players around the country. And he is the co-founder of What Drives Winning, Brett Ledbetter.
It's great to be here.
Thank you very much for taking the time to talk a little bit with us. So straight from the training ground, Brett, is kind of geared towards the soccer world, but we have had a lot of coaches on here, college coaches, youth coaches, some professional players. So really, we want to talk to you about your the kind of mental coaching aspect that you've gotten into. I've seen you and Becky, your co-founder with What Drives Winning, multiple times at the United Soccer Coaches Convention, which I highly recommend if anyone hasn't caught that presentation. But I would like to first just ask you what kind of motivated you? I know you're a basketball guy, I think originally. What motivated you, or how did you get into this mental coaching space?
Well, we started a basketball academy when I was still in college, and we started working with fifth through 12th graders, both male and female. And one of the things that we noticed is that for basketball, the two questions they were getting asked after games by people that weren't at the game were, did you win and how many points did you score? And so often they would put so much attention to that. And we were developing a footwork system to try and help with skill development. And one of the things that we noticed with that is as they started to work that system, they could do the movements in practice, but then transitioning into a game was a challenge. So we started to ask the question, why? And we then realized that it was really about the individual doing the movement. So we created a person first approach where we prioritized character development and tried to build the performance and racial skills for them to become a better performer and a leader. And what we found is when we focused on that aspect, it became a multidimensional approach, and they actually got better at handling the moment because they were focusing on things that they could control, which was their response to whatever was happening in front of them.
So not as much results driven, correct? More about the process.
One of my favorite lines is, who are you becoming as a result of the chase? We prioritize that, and then we use basketball as a form of expression to do that.
Recently you did an elite study or a study with 200 elite youth soccer players that I saw, where you asked them the question kind of along these lines, and you asked them what the top 10 reasons that disrupt their peace of mind as athletes. What was the most powerful thing, or what was the most significant thing that you took away from their answers?
I think that anytime you ask people that question, they give you insight to the source of what their next challenge is. So for us, when we asked that question, the variety of answers was incredible. Now, then you can take it into a group setting, and parents were on that list. And that's probably what you're referring to. And one of the
Yeah,
questions that we'd ask the kids is, what are the subtle signals that your parents show you after a game that their mood is dictated by your performance? And some of the answers that they got back were unbelievable. Now, because there were 200, we had them write them down and then we just trended them out. And that's a really efficient way for coaches, if they wanted to do that with their team or their club, could gather that information, and it's anonymous. So it's not incriminating if they write it down. And then what
sure.
we wanted to do is share that with the parents and just ask them, here's some of the answers that we're seeing. What do you all see when you look at that? And if you're sober and you look at that, it's a great tool for self-reflection. And I think most of the parents in that club, that's exactly where they took it. And they were like, wow, I never really connected that they would ever see that, because I thought being silent on the ride home gave them room to process. But I am more talkative after a win. And so it just shows you the interpretation can be wildly different from kid to kid. And when parents realize that, that helps them monitor their signals to where they can be aligned with their child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a parent myself. I have 2 daughters, and being a coach, I think I feel like I probably have more insight into those things as other parents, but it's still difficult, how to handle a bad game or, a rough game, a tough loss, like you said. So I think that's great. I want to stay along those lines. What advice can you give to parents in this crazy world that we live in right now? I know you've been doing this for a while yourself, so things have changed a lot with AAU, travel softball, club volleyball, club soccer, and this crazy world of youth sports in the United States. What advice do you have to parents who have younger children right now as they try to kind of navigate all of that?
We used to have horses to get from point A to point B. And then there were bridges. And then there were all these things. So what does that show? That progression is ever changing. So the circumstances, the competitive circumstances are always going to be ever changing. Your approach can be the one thing that's consistent. And one of the challenges that I would have for any leader is if you can walk into a room the next day after a competition and people not know whether or not you won or lost, that is a sign of a process-driven coach. And when they see that consistency from you, that helps them have consistency with their approach, and that builds their self-trust to navigate the future moments.
So what I'm hearing from you is not as many highs and lows. Is that correct?
When you focus on the outcomes, you're going to be on an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
When you focus on the process, you're focusing on your response because you're asking yourself, what is the next right thing? And then you're acting accordingly. So when you're focused on the next right thing, there aren't emotions because you're looking at it more strategically and you're channeling whatever energy you have into doing the next right thing.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense, and I couldn't agree more. For coaches out there, I know you've worked with some of the most prolific coaches in the world, and we'll get to that in a minute. But you mentioned earlier how you worked with the youth soccer players, and they filled out those surveys anonymously, which I think was a key word. What advice do you have to youth coaches out there in any sport who maybe don't have a lot of resources, maybe they don't have a staff, maybe a guy that's coaching a 15-year-old AAU team, a 14-year-old club soccer team that has no assistant coaches. What are some basic things that they could do to try to work on leadership, mental reflection, and a lot of the things that you do? What could they do on their own with their team?
When we started our basketball academy, we had no money and we were working uh, 80 hours a week and you're making, $40,000 and that's your full-time job. And so we couldn't go and hire other people to help us. So what we did is we developed a middle level management system where we would have people that maybe were more advanced inside the group help the people that weren't as advanced. And what that did is that allowed the people that were technically advanced to work on their leadership skills. And so as they started to help their peers, we would then watch them as leaders. And then now you have a multidimensional approach. The less advanced are getting better as performers, the more advanced they're getting better as leaders, and you're creating a community of learners and they can feel that energy. And when you have people looking forward to coming to your environment, that's a great signal that you're doing wonderful things as a leader.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I have a question regarding that. Fun seems to have lost its way a lot through youth sports, all the things we talked about already, club, the money involved, the travel, the pressure, people chasing college scholarships, all that kind of stuff. I'm glad to hear that you say how important fun still is in the process. Have you noticed that change from the time you started working way back at that basketball camp until now, how that's kind of gotten lost along the way for youth sports?
I think that high performance requires a price tag, and that price tag then comes along with pressure. And that's the deal you're signing up for. And learning how to navigate that pressure is one of the best lessons that we can learn through the sport experience. And so, for an athlete that might be listening or a coach that has an athlete that might be struggling with expectations, one of the things that we ask them to do is to write a letter to expectations as if it's a person and describe the impact that it has on your life, good and bad. When they start to commit their thoughts to paper, it is so insightful on where you can now take their development because you can see what's stressing them out and then you can help them make peace with that so they can find their way back to fun.
You have also worked with one of my favorite soccer presenters in the world, Bill Beswick. I had the fortune of seeing him at the United Soccer Coaches Convention one year. He's a sports psychologist, if anyone doesn't know, worked with some of the greatest soccer teams around the world. Was there anything you could take away or learn from someone such as Bill Beswick?
I would say the best thing that Bill did for me was we were on a rocket ship unexpectedly. And so when your career is taking off and you're not necessarily prepared for that, there's so many things happening to you at once and you're trying to process it. Bill was 40 years older than me and he had Parkinson's. And one of the things that was so clear to me is how clear his perspective was on life. And so I wanted that voice in my life. So I asked him if I could hire him as my thinking partner. And throughout the years, some of the most cherished conversations I've ever had came from him. And the reason they were so great is he was willing to tell me the truth about his life. And then I could interface that with my own experience. And he is a giant among the field. And my life is so much better because of Bill Beswick.
Yeah, what a tremendous person and just a tremendous presenter. Amazing wealth of knowledge and insight into, the mental aspect of sports in general. That's great to hear. You've also worked with some of the most prolific coaches, like we said, Coach K from Duke, Anson Dorrance, Geno Auriemma. The list goes Uh, on or off the camera. What's one or two of the most significant things you've taken from coaches who have had the highest level of success, but that maybe we're not aware of or that you've learned from them?
Well, I would ask you personally, I want you to really get in touch with the question you just asked me.
Mhm.
What go back and pay attention to the words you're asking me with that question.
Is there anything significant, or what's the most significant thing you've taken from coaches at that level?
And so if you think about what you're saying with success, how are you measuring their success?
As a coach, I would measure it as the person that they are because I think a lot of times it gets lost. Everyone knows their resume and they know the things that they've accomplished on paper, but the people like that I've had the fortune of coming across, I find it very interesting to know how they navigate those things on a personal level because I think at the end of the day, they're all people like us, but we always see their resume.
And I think that's what brings the attention is the resume. And so whenever I'm asked that question, what happens is certain coaches are isolated. And some of the best coaching that I've seen done is when the team is in a developmental phase and they're under 500. And somehow that coach is being intentional with every possession. He's keeping the locker room together. Those are the masters of craft, just like the other ones. The other ones just get the visibility because of their resume. And then we start to associate that with their success. And the question by nature then focuses on the outcome. So the question I would then ask the coach if they're trying to seek an answer to that question would just be, what's your definition of success? And if I asked you that question, what would you say?
As a high school coach, my definition of success is to develop people. I coach girls, so to develop confident girls who can go out and be successful in the real world someday. That's that's what I use.
It's a beautiful definition. And what's interesting about your definition is it has nothing to do with what the world focuses on. That is an
Absolutely.
intrinsic pursuit by you. And so for me, when I attribute success to people that I observe, it's more that they have a very clear definition of what success looks like to them. And I then look at, hey, how do they execute their energy around that definition? And the people that are able to manage their life's energy around things that matter most to them and do it in a way that's fulfilling, those are the ones that are the masters of craft in my mind.
I couldn't agree more. Our high school team, for example, after every game, we never talk about the score because everyone knows the score. You know what the score was. We talk about our effort. We talk about how hard we worked as a team. We talk about teamwork, those kind of things, because I believe, like you said, that will take you to where you want to go as a team. A lot of times you can get caught up in false results, especially at the high school level. Like you said. So I agree, and I really appreciate your insight. What help or advice could you give to youth coaches across the board out there um, in any sport? Just a quick piece of advice in terms of how important the mental aspect is to sports for kids today.
Well, I think the first thing, if you're going to be a leader in any position, I think you have to define your objective. So, what is your purpose? So, for you, you just said to develop confident, resilient women. But then, what I would ask you to do is to define what confidence looks like in action. And then that's going to draw a line and delineate what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. And then you teach to that using their examples. So whenever they come in below the line, what I would challenge people to do is think about Like your job is to influence the future behavior of the people that you lead. So how do you convert that below the line behavior into something that's sustainable, that moves them closer to the objective? That is where the art of coaching happens. And we found that the best way to do that is by winning influence as opposed to forcing compliance. When you're winning influence, you're not relying on authority. When you rely on authority, that disrupts the relationship because now it becomes a power-based relationship. And if you have to pull that lever, you put a ceiling on your upward mobility as a coach. The greatest coaches can meet people where they are and find their next level without having to use power. And part of that is they embody the standard that they're asking for. So if the confidence and resilience is most important to you as a coach, then they need to see what that looks like in all moments. And when you don't live up to that moment, they need to hear you say, hey, here's what I should have done. Here's what I did. I'm going to be better for you. And when you do that as the leader, what happens is they're taking their cues from you and they're seeing, wow, like coach is kind of accountable. This is a safe place to be accountable. It's not going to be weaponized against me. And so when they see that, then they start to do it. And it then has a whole multiple effect that compounds the values that you're trying to instill.
If you're just tuning in, we're here with co-founder Brett Ledbetter of What Drives Winning. We'll put links down below in our podcast of his website, the books you can buy. I highly suggest looking into that. His podcast, some great stuff for coaches out there and parents as well, and athletes as well, as you've worked with a lot of athletes, professional athletes also. Brett, we'll get you out here on one last question. You've done this a long time. You said at the beginning how you started at a basketball camp and it's taken you to amazing places now. What are you most proud of with your career up to this point?
It's a great question to ask people. And I'm going to challenge you to think about this because you're already asking me. If you're leading people, when you ask them, when are you most proud of yourself? They will tell you their value system. And then you can ask them, what percent of the time are you that person? Then you can ask them, what percent of the time are you that person under adversity? And usually that number is smaller.
Yeah.
And so if your goal as a leader is to help them, then you can say, how do we increase that number during adversity? Because that when it matters most, because our team is taking their cues from you. So if I had to answer the question that you were asking me, I would say that when things are the hardest, that's when you tap into your best self. And when you do that and you look back on it, there's so much beauty in learning that. I would say the other thing, not to get too philosophical, is how you then look and learn from the times that you weren't that. And can you give grace to yourself in a way that you forgive yourself? So that liberates you from that experience, but in a way that the lesson stays with you and you can apply it forward. One of my favorite questions to ask someone is like, they've been in their career doing it a long time, let's say a couple decades. What would you tell the day one people you were leading? And a lot of times they'll say, I'm sorry for not knowing what I didn't know. And I think that all of those people helped you learn how to be better for the current moment. And the best way to pay it forward is to serve the moment with your highest integrity.
Tremendous. I couldn't have said it better myself. And again, thank you, Brett, so much for taking the time to talk to us. We really love everything you're doing, what drives winning, and all the help you're providing out there for coaches and athletes everywhere. Again, make sure you check them out. And Brett, thank you so much. Until next time, straight from the training ground.